Special thanks to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for sponsoring today's video. Once again, we're back with another edition of our Klub Outside Q&A Round-up series. As always, Kubo takes and answers a variety of questions directly from fans over on his personal Q&A platform, and then we try to dissect those answers right here and see if there's anything of value to be found within them. A lot of the time, Kubo's comments are a mix of light-hearted chatter and fluff, but sometimes we are given real, genuine insight into the story and world of Bleach that for whatever reason wasn't found in the original material. And as always, I'm not looking at every single answer he's ever given, nor even necessarily looking at them in chronological order. Mostly I'm trying to curate the answers that I find to be the most interesting and to have the most value that I can then share with you. And so, speaking of which, this time the questions revolve around the topic of what Transcendence really means, whether Squad 5 specialises in Kidō, what Yamamoto losing his arm really meant, and more. A huge thank you to M Shadows as always for providing the translations to the questions and answers. There's a link in the description to where you too can find them, so make sure to check them out. Right, on with the latest roundup. We'll begin with the topic of Transcendence and what it really means. Also, apologies for the freshly shaven Tomo jump scare, but it was time. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't done already, consider hitting subscribe if you are maybe new to the channel or you just haven't hit subscribe yet. Consider doing so, it really does help me out and it helps to push us to our next major milestone, and I would really appreciate all of the support. And speaking of support, if you haven't done yet, check out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games. I'm uploading more frequently there. I'm trying to upload at least a couple of times a week if possible, and your support over there does mean the absolute world to me. So many of you have already gone over and subscribed, and I really do appreciate it so very much. Even if you just go over there, check out the videos, that also helps out a lot as well. So for whatever you've done over there, your support is absolutely appreciated, and thank you all so very much. So let's begin with the topic of Transcendence. Transcendence has always been at the forefront of Bleach debate for many years now, yet as a concept, it is only around within the story for a very short amount of time, at least where it is explicitly talked about. The idea of transcending, of breaking the boundary between Shinigami and Hollow and evolving into something new, is only really explored during the Deicide mini-arc, at the end of the Arrancar arc when Aizen takes centre stage at last. Sure, it's been known for a while beforehand that this has been Aizen's goal for some time, and of course the Hogyoku has been used throughout the arc to create the likes of the Arrancar and the Vizard in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, so this notion of breaking boundaries is a core theme of the arc from the start. But Transcendence is something wholly different. Now, this first question is kind of interesting, as reading into it, it seems to have come about as a result of two marginally different explanations of what being transcendent may actually mean. Of course, towards the end of the Deicide arc, after fusing with the Hogyoku, Aizen begins to break down and surpass the natural boundaries of Shinigami and Hollow, as the Hogyoku starts to totally rewrite his soul. Of course, it is unlike anything we've ever seen before in the series and would ever see again. Aizen's entire body is encased within a cocoon as he undergoes evolution, actual physical evolution of the soul before our very eyes. When Isshin briefly breaks the cocoon open, we can see that there is no longer a tangible man inside, only a twisting, shifting mass of power, as Aizen's entire form is reconstituted within the confines of this shell. Honestly, the more time has passed, the more I've come to really enjoy and appreciate this entire concept. It's creepy, but an effective way, I think, a quite creative and very visual way of showing just how far beyond Aizen is actually going. But at least as far as I'm concerned, the two different approaches to transcendence explored in Deicide have always felt distinct, Aizen and Ichigo's. Aizen's method of transcending to begin with is artificial. He could only achieve transcendence by fusing with the Hogyoku, which isn't inherently something to do with him. Without it, he'd only ever be an extremely powerful Shinigami. One of the strongest, certainly, but never crucially going beyond that. He would be akin to Yamamoto, and this is what I've always noted in regards to Yamamoto. Yamamoto is consistently depicted as the absolute, unquestioned pinnacle of what it means to be a pure Shinigami. But he isn't transcendent, because he isn't a hybrid. His soul hasn't trespassed upon any boundary, it's just reached the absolute maximum capacity of what a pure Shinigami soul can do. Of course, this is true for all the races of Bleach. Someone like Stark, for example, is clearly again the absolute pinnacle of what it means to be a hollow, but he isn't transcendent. Yamamoto is a very interesting one. At least initially, he too shouldn't be transcendent either. He's just, again, the summit of Quincy power rolled into one man, but he is a bit of a weird one in that he is the child of the Soul King, meaning that he does inherently have some truly godly powers. And of course, upon absorbing his father's power, Yamamoto does definitely at that point transcend the boundaries of the races to become something more. Meanwhile, by contrast, going back to the Arrancar arc to the Deicide arc, Ichigo is able to become transcendent totally naturally because he was born the perfect hybrid, which puts him in the place of really ultimate power within the Bleach universe. Sure, some of the elements that led to his birth, such as Masaki being infected with Hollow Reiatsu, aren't natural per se, that wasn't supposed to happen, but Ichigo himself was born with all of these powers inside him, coalescing within him to create someone who has access to everything. In the entire series, he is the only totally natural hybrid, which is also a reason as to why he's a Soul King candidate. Interestingly, I believe the only other character who comes close, in the manga at least, is Ginjo, because he is a natural hybrid of Shinigami, human, and hollow, but he has no Quincy in him, unlike Ichigo. But all of this plays rather nicely into the question and eventual answer. Kubo was asked the following. Due to the Hogyoku, Aizen evolved into things like a butterfly and a skull-like monster, claiming that he surpassed Hollows and Shinigami and had become transcendent, while also saying that Ichigo had temporarily broken the barrier between Shinigami and Hollow and become transcendent. In other words, does that mean that the form Aizen had taken is a result of hollowification? So again, we can see here that there are clearly two different definitions of transcendent being used even within the series itself. The person asking the question is asking about hollowification because they think that's how Ichigo attained his transcendent form, and that Aizen is trying to do the same thing. But Aizen himself explicitly notes that he would never hollowify, as he clearly believes it to be beneath him. When Aizen talks of becoming transcendent, he claims to have surpassed Hollows and Shinigami in a way that speaks of becoming something totally new, totally separate of the two of them. Meanwhile, where Ichigo is concerned, he broke the barrier between Shinigami and Hollow, implying a fusion of the two instead. Of course, Aizen is verging on complete delusion at this point of the story and isn't a reliable narrator, but at the same time I do think it's Kubo attempting to differentiate between the two. And Kubo responds by saying, the transcendent status that Aizen is referring to is that of surpassing the boundary of the soul, so Ichigo and Aizen both underwent different forms of transcendence. So, as you can see from Kubo's answer, he doesn't even mention hollowification because ultimately it doesn't really have anything to do with it. It's a fairly simple answer, but I think one that tells us all we need to know anyway. Basically, Kubo is saying that transcendence, the idea of transcendence, or the status of being transcendent, is just the act of surpassing the metaphysical boundary of one's natural soul limits. It's not a specific form or anything like that, it can barely even be counted as a classification. It's just a term for those who have managed to go beyond, no matter what form that takes. Which is why I mentioned earlier that Yamamoto also plays quite nicely into this. Even if he's not technically transcendent initially, he certainly is once he absorbs the Soul King, and that is his method of going beyond his natural soul limits, of surpassing the boundary. But I like this because it feels like transcendence and what that really means has always been something of a sticking point for the community, but it turns out that it's really not that complicated. Does it get a little messy and lost in translation during Deicide when the concept of dimensions and different planes of existence are brought in? Sure, a little bit, but ultimately Transcendence itself isn't this concrete thing. It's a fluid term, it's a blanket term for going beyond your own limits and becoming something new, to the point where regular beings can't even sense you. And of course that's where the notion of different planes of existence comes in. I guess my remaining question is, what's the difference between a hybrid and someone who has transcended? Because a hybrid is technically going beyond your natural soul limits. If Ichigo broke the barrier between Shinigami and Hollow, then couldn't it be said that the Vizard did the same thing? Of course, we know for a fact that their processes to achieve said power were completely different, and again, Ichigo's comes from a place of being totally natural, as white is a part of him just as much as Old Man Zangetsu is, whereas with the Vizard, their hollow selves are likely malignant, invasive entities in the way we thought that white was initially. So maybe that's all it takes to be transcendent, and again, like I said, Aizen achieved it artificially, so again, that's different too. Again, I guess it goes back to my point from earlier that hollowification isn't the standard required to transcend. Ultimately, it doesn't really have anything to do with it, it's not really the same thing. But on the flip side, it does kind of feel like the Vizard do go beyond their natural limits, so I'm not entirely sure what the difference is there, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it down in the comments. But yeah, that aside, I do think it is quite an interesting topic. It is quite nice to get Transcendence nailed down, it feels like, and to actually know that it really isn't that complicated after all. The fact that Transcendence is more of a blanket, fluid term than an actual hard and fast classification, I think makes a lot more sense. Anyway, before we move on to the next topic, first a word from today's sponsor. Tokyo Treat and Sakurako are celebrating the start of spring in style with two beautiful, specially crafted Sakura-themed boxes for you to enjoy, helping you to experience Japan and its traditions from the comfort of your own home. A monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local snack makers across the country, Sakurako's theme this month is Seasons of Sakura. Featuring this genuinely lovely seasonal design, the box includes 20 traditional, authentic Japanese snacks, each one specially selected to help you embrace the Sakura season. Snacks that include Sakura Manju, Sakura Mochi, and Sakura Daifuku, all of which pair well with the sweet Sakura tea. And of course, with each Sakurako box, you'll receive a piece of beautiful Japanese tableware too. Included this month is a Sakura sake glass. I've been working with these guys for so long now that I actually know what a lot of this stuff is straight off the bat. I recognise a lot of the traditional Japanese snacks, this of course being manju, and it is delicious. We're going to dive right in. So yeah, as usual, this is a very traditional Japanese filling, the soft bean paste, and manju is one of my absolute favourite items that can come in these boxes, so this is a good one. And this box is absolutely chock full of stuff. We've got a waffle here, we've got the aforementioned Sakura Mochi, there's loads of stuff to try. Meanwhile, Tokyo Treat's theme this month is Cherry Blossom Bites. Tokyo Treat is a fun and exclusive Japanese snack subscription box that also wants to celebrate the Sakura bloom with a selection of seasonal items, including strawberry shortcake Kit Kat, Sakura cakes, and a Sakura donut too. I'm not kidding around when I say this thing is absolutely bursting at the seams here. Here are these strawberry shortcake Kit Kats. There's just so much stuff, this whole thing is just falling out. We're going to dive into one of these Kit Kats right now. The Kit Kats always go down very well with our friends and family. Look at that, look how quaint and dainty the packaging is. You wouldn't get that sort of thing here in the UK, trust me. Yeah, that's lovely. White chocolate, I think I've said before, is not normally my go-to, but that's really, really good. So there's a couple of items I'm quite interested in trying this time around, the marshmallows and these little wrapped up mochis, I think. We're going to go with marshmallow. We do mochi quite a lot in these. Oh dear. So they kind of just went absolutely everywhere, but that's fine. I'll do clear up later. There's quite a lot of marshmallows in here, so we're just gonna... They are little Sakura petals. I'm basically eating Senbon Sakura right now. Yeah, they're very nice, very cute. Again, very dainty, very fitting for the theme. And of course, each box also comes with a cultural guide booklet that tells you a little bit more about the snacks you receive each month, plus the month's chosen themes and how they are celebrated in Japan, as well as detailing that all-important allergen information. Alright, but that's it for March's Sakura-themed boxes and their rather special designs. As always, I want to say a big thank you to Tokyo Treat and Sakurako for supporting the channel. It really does mean a lot. Remember to usher in the Sakura season in your own home with some boxes for you or someone you love by following the link in the description or the pinned comment down below for an exclusive offer of $5 off of your first order. Thanks everyone, and enjoy. Alright, and up next we've got another pretty interesting topic, I think. Despite being a major part of how a Shinigami works in essence, I'm surprised the fact that their wrists act as vents for their Reiatsu doesn't come up more often. I mean, it's as though they have actual kill switches right there on their bodies, as seen when Kisuke tries to incinerate Aizen from the inside out. He does so almost immediately, and nearly succeeds simply by sealing Aizen's wrists with barely a touch, using a device he created. Which is honestly kind of scary when you think about it. Kisuke could realistically kill literally any Shinigami just by barely touching them, and then BG9 later on impales Soifon through the wrist when he realises how her Shunko works, I think effectively disabling it immediately using, presumably, his shrift to know and understand the data. Anyway, Kubo was actually asked a question regarding said Reiatsu vents, which reads, Shinigami have Reiatsu vents on their wrists that if closed off would result in the individual being burned from the inside. However, let's say they aren't closed off like how Urahara did, but instead the person loses both of their arms, do they still burn from the inside out? Also, for those that end up one-armed, like Yamamoto, Genryusai, Shigekuni, what kind of negative effects will that have when it comes to Reiatsu and such? This is a good question, and mostly I think one that makes complete sense to ask due to how significant a fact it is that you can essentially kill any Shinigami just by sealing their wrists off. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that they won't just explode if they lose an arm, considering the amount of characters that lose arms in the series, unless this reader then thinks that that wound is no longer a vent and all of their Reiatsu goes out of the other wrist instead, which I guess is maybe what they're thinking, but this means that these Reiatsu vents are absolutely necessary for every Shinigami to function. Presumably, Reiatsu courses through their bodies all the time, almost like blood itself being circulated around the body, but the pressure can build exceptionally quickly. It almost feels like a very fatal flaw in the way Shinigami are actually made up, and I actually wonder as well, if you sealed the wrists of a random low-level Shinigami, would their Reiatsu back up as quickly as it did with Aizen, or was that purely because of how powerful he was at the time? Either way, Kubo had the following to say. When losing an arm, the cut section becomes the vent exit. However, Reiatsu manipulation becomes extremely difficult. That's the reason why Yamamoto was criticising him for not healing his arm. Him, of course, being Yamamoto. On the surface, again, that all makes total sense to me, save for the fact that we don't know where Reiatsu exits the wrists. The fact that cutting off an arm would then result in the entire wound becoming the new vent implies all the Reiatsu would just come blasting out of said wound, but that means there has to be somewhere for the Reiatsu to escape in the first place. So, does that mean Shinigami have tiny little holes in their wrists or something, that they are constantly leaking power? I'm not a big fan of that visual, to be totally honest. Perhaps the more interesting thing to glean from this answer, however, is that Yamamoto was clearly hit pretty hard by losing his arm. Considering Reiatsu manipulation becomes incredibly difficult, you have to wonder what that meant for Yamamoto. Were there no longer powers and abilities he could use, for example? How much effort did he have to exert just to control his Reiatsu now that he was having a harder time manipulating it, and did that have any effect on its output, on the fact that he used bankai while he only had one arm, and still managed to absolutely dominate basically every single Quincy he came across in the first invasion? Yamamoto is of course a special case. He's one of the strongest and most skilled of all the Shinigami, so perhaps it came easier to him than it would to most in that situation. But he also has an immeasurable amount of Reiryoku, so I don't know how that would affect things. I wonder what the impact of losing one's arm actually has on Reiatsu control. Is it a bigger detriment than we might think? Soifon lost her arm against Baragon and still managed to fire off her bankai twice, despite it draining her considerably to do so, which is now even more impressive when you consider she was likely having to maintain her Reiatsu output constantly in the midst of battle as it leaked out of her wound where she was missing an arm. I also wonder what this means for characters like Kenpachi and Ichigo, who initially couldn't control their Reiatsu at all. If they were to lose an arm, would the Reiatsu just violently explode out of them like a bomb or something, or considering their Reiatsu is already wild and untamed, maybe it's as though they've lost their limbs already. I find it a bit weird though that Kubo says Reiatsu manipulation was the reason Yamamoto criticized Yamamoto for not restoring his arm. I mean, I guess it could be, in the sense that Yamamoto felt that made Yamamoto much weaker, that he was unable to control his Reiatsu as well as he used to. But it's pretty clear-cut in the manga that Yamamoto criticizes Yamamoto for being too soft, for growing too soft and weak, and not wanting to involve humans in their affairs. And also I feel like it would be pretty rich of Yamamoto to criticize Yamamoto for not restoring his arm purely on the basis of Reiatsu manipulation, when we can clearly see, based on what we know of Roid's ability, that Yamamoto would have absolutely steamrolled even this version of Yamamoto in bankai, one arm or not. Either way, this is a pretty cool piece of information, I think, and one that touches on a fairly major aspect of Shinigami makeup that does often fly under the radar. It seems like barely a week goes by without us talking about the 5th division in some sense, and this next topic ties in nicely to the recent discussions we've been having regarding the Vizard, and more specifically Shinji's Kidō prowess. A reader picked up on the fact that many of the high-ranking 5th division officers we've spent time with are all apparently very proficient in Kidō. Hinamori, Aizen, but also Shinji too. In fact, I'm not sure if this post was released before or after Shinji used Hado 91 in the anime, I can't remember, but either way that supports this notion. And so, having realised that, they asked Kubo the following question. I love all iterations of Squad 5, past and present, so please let me ask you, since Hinamori is said to be an expert in Kidō, and Aizen can use Kidōs in the 90s without incantation, I was surprised when he did that, guess he was hiding his true power, is Squad 5 specialised in the usage of Kidō? Also, is Hirako good at Kidō? He was able to spot Aizen through his disguise, so I figured he's good at sensing Reiatsu, therefore maybe he's also good at Kidō too? He asked Hinamori for treatment, so maybe he's not actually good at it. I'm spinning in circles, so please let me know. This person is very desperate to know, so thankfully Kubo actually chose them to be answered. And also I just realised, having read that question back, this must have been prior to the anime coming out, or episode 39 anyway, because we don't know yet, at least based on this writing, that Hirako can perform a Kidō like 91 without an incantation. But before we move on to the answer, I'm not entirely sure what the reader is talking about when they say that Hirako asked Hinamori for treatment. Because the only scene I can think of is when they rescue Amida during the Thousand Year Blood War arc and he orders Hinamori to heal Soifon, which I guess could be the scene they're talking about, but I always just assumed that Shinji wanted to catch Amida up to speed first and foremost, not that he literally couldn't heal her, but it's more a getting two things done at the same time kind of deal. But either way, this is what Kubo had to say on the matter. There's nothing decided on in particular, but within Squad 5 there is the Kidō Recovery Room, a facility tasked with the recovery of a certain type of spiritual power that is consumed when using Kidō, so it's rather common for people who are good at Kidō to enter. Hirako himself is good at Kidō, but Kaido requires a special kind of talent, even among Kidō users, which Hirako himself lacks. So he notes that there is no particular designation for Squad 5, which again lines up with how they've been presented to date. Many of the other squads have specific jobs, specific roles within the Gotei 13 and the wider Soul Society, but Squad 5, as far as I'm aware, has never been given one. And while it would have been cool for one squad to be Kidō focused, in a sense I can't help but feel like that's already been covered, what with the Kidō Corps and even Squad 4 to some degree. But it's interesting to hear about this new Kidō Recovery Room, and Kubo indicating that there is a completely separate type of Reiryoku consumed when a Shinigami uses Kidō. I'm kind of amazed we've never really heard about this before, to be totally honest. We've heard of things like Kaido being used to treat both the body and the spirit energy, but never of there being a specific type of spiritual power for Kidō usage exclusively, almost as though every Shinigami possesses multiple spiritual energy tanks within them, each one with a different designation. But supposedly this one particular room is why it's common for people who are good at Kidō to enter the 5th division, which is definitely an unexpected answer, but interesting all the same, and honestly just makes me wish again that Kidō had received more coverage throughout the manga. I do like that while Kubo acknowledges that Shinji is skilled in Kidō, Kaido apparently takes a very special kind of talent, meaning there really are only certain Shinigami capable of becoming healers and joining Squad 4. This leaves me then with one question remaining. To be able to use Kaido, to have that special talent, that special kind of talent as Kubo puts it, does that mean one has to be even better at general Kidō than other Shinigami? Or is it like a different kind of being good at Kidō? Basically what I'm getting at is every member of Squad 4 extremely skilled and talented at Kidō in general, or are they Shinigami who all happen to be specifically skilled in Kaido alone? Or do you only become good at Kaido by being good at Kidō in the first place? We know that Unohana and Isane are both Kidō experts in general, but I wonder if that extends to the rest of the squad too. Even some characters like Izuru, who was once a member of the 4th Division, have displayed immense Kidō prowess in the past, so perhaps it is true that they are all experts. And finally, for our last topic, we usually take a look at a slightly more light-hearted question to end things off, but actually this one is rather interesting. A reader wrote into Kubo with an inquiry about Kurumadani Zenosuke, who, let's face it, is not a character that gets discussed much within the wider community, asking, Tsuchinamazu's release command is good morning, whereas other Zanpakutō have order phrases for their release command. Is that because Kurumadani is still in the conversational and synchronization phase? Now, I'll be completely honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what the conversational and synchronization phase actually is. This is one of those typical Klub Outside questions where I sort of sit back and think, how on earth did you even come up with that question? But this one, in some sense, it does make sense to ask. It's actually a pretty interesting and cool question, I think. It's true that, at least as far as I can recall, every single Zanpakutō release is more of an order than anything else, with the Shinigami essentially telling their Zanpakutō to do something, hence why it's called a release command. But yeah, Kurumadani just says good morning to his, which is weird. Anyway, Kubo's answer was also really intriguing, reading, Kurumadani is a rare case of Shinigami who couldn't subjugate his Zanpakutō, and instead curiously uses it as if they were friends. This is, again, honestly kind of unexpected and adds an extra wrinkle to Kurumadani's character, but here's the thing. Unless I'm completely mistaken, I didn't think you had to subjugate your Zanpakutō to learn Shikai. Subjugate feels like a very deliberate word. I thought Shikai came about as part of a natural process of imprinting one's soul onto an Asauchi, generally at the end of their training in the Shinigami Academy, when they should inevitably discover how to hear their Zanpakutō spirit's name and then visit their inner world. I thought subjugating one's Zanpakutō was only necessary in order to learn bankai. First you materialize the spirit into your world, then you force them to submit. So maybe what this answer means is that Kurumadani never actually manifested his Zanpakutō properly and never visited his inner world? As far as I'm aware, this kind of Shinigami and Zanpakutō partnership is completely unprecedented, and maybe this means that Tsuchinamazu has a true form, completely unlike the likes of which we see. What's even weirder, though, is that they are friends. So Tsuchinamazu clearly acknowledges and wants to work alongside Kurumadani to some degree, but on its own terms? This is even stranger when you consider the philosophy behind the blade is me. Tsuchinamazu and Kurumadani should be one and the same, which I guess just means he's really good friends with himself. Isn't that a good thing, though? Weirdly enough, it sounds like Kurumadani has a better approach to their relationship than having to subjugate his Zanpakutō, which doesn't sound healthy at all. And I've always found that to be a conflicting idea, at odds with the blade is me in the first place. Uetsu disparages the notion that Zanpakutō should be tools, weapons, or even partners because the Shinigami and the Zanpakutō are one and the same, but they still need to be forced into submission to teach the Shinigami bankai. I guess in some sense it is supposed to be a meta commentary on the idea of discipline, that the Shinigami in question need to discipline themselves in order to acquire that power, and perhaps Kurumadani completely lacks the required discipline and strength, and so instead simply chooses to live side by side the Zanpakutō as friends and nothing more. It's very interesting and quite surprising, to be honest, because it does seem to contradict and upend the Shinigami and Zanpakutō relationship. And does this mean that technically anyone could call out Tsuchinamazu's release command? But then no, because Tsuchinamazu is still Kurumadani's Zanpakutō at the end of the day, so it's not like just anyone could use it. I'm overthinking it. It's literally just Kubo's way of acknowledging the differences in release command style, and I guess I think that's pretty cool. But then Tsuchinamazu must have appeared before Kurumadani in some form for him to even know its name in the first place. So at what point were they like, look, I just want to be good friends with you, we're not actually going to work like a Zanpakutō and Shinigami relationship does? How does that conversation even come about? This idea that Kurumadani can't subjugate his Zanpakutō and therefore they have a different relationship to everyone else is really strange, because subjugation shouldn't come into achieving Shikai. So maybe it has something to do with him trying to learn bankai? I have no idea. Like I said, I'm overthinking it. It's probably just best to end the video there. Alright guys, but that is it for this installment of the Klub Outside Q&A Roundup series. As always, I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it today as well. Let me know down in the comments which of the topics was your favourite to cover this time around. Was it the topic of Transcendence? Was it the topic of Shinji and the others in Squad 5 being particularly good at Kidō? Maybe it was the discussion of Yamamoto losing his arm and what that means for a Shinigami's control over their Reiatsu, or maybe it was this peculiar topic looking at Kurumadani Zenosuke's Zanpakutō release command. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Once again, thank you so very much for watching, guys. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already, and consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, if you haven't done that either too. I really would appreciate it. A pretty whopping number of people watching over there aren't subscribed, at least according to my statistics, so if you want to go and change that, again, that would be a giant help and massively appreciated. And of course, I want to end today's video, as we always do, by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon. Again, your support does mean the absolute world to me, as always. I can't stress that enough, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you, so thank you all so very much. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.